Not seem today that our world has been somehow turned upside down, or at least that something's dramatically wrong. How many more mass shootings do we have to endure? In an airport terminal, in a nightclub, a high school. The list could go on and on and on. It seems every week we're hit with another one of these. The coroner announced last week that in Erie County, there were 100 drug-related deaths this past year, 100. And religion. If you examine carefully every civilization in history, people have always had a quest for some type of a supreme being, a prime mover, a god, whatever they called it, because they realized that life was larger than itself. And yet today, religion in the Western world is increasingly marginalized. Only 5% of the French now consider themselves Catholic. And France was the filia ecclesia, the daughter of the church. In a study done recently by the Pew Institute on American Catholics who have left the church, they found that 25% of them said they didn't leave the church because they were bored with Mass or because of the abuse scandal or anything like that. 25% of them said they left the church because by the time they were 10 or 12 years old, they no longer believed in the existence of God. How did this all come about? In the 1960s, sociologists tell us we moved into an era of postmodernism. Postmodernism has no boundaries. Postmodernism has nothing to contain it. There used to be a consensus about what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil. That consensus has disappeared in our midst. There's an absence of things. We can't seem to agree on who we are as a people, where we should be going, et cetera, et cetera. And so postmodernism has left us sort of floating. We had a sexual revolution in the 1960s, and we felt finally we're freed from the mores of a Victorian society. But nothing replaced it. And so does anything go? Where do we go from here? I think there are three things that need to be accomplished. Number one, we need to reimagine and reinstitute myth. What is myth? Myth is something that I can't quite put my arms around. I can't quite define, but it is something that grabs hold of me and makes me larger than myself. It enables me to know that I'm part of something, that things are right. For example, last May, a group of us went to Normandy, France, where the D-Day invasion took place that ultimately ended World War II. We had an incredible guide who took us to the beaches, showed us where the Americans came ashore, those massive cliffs that they had to climb. Then they took us to the top, and we saw the German bunkers, 3 feet thick concrete walls. The guns are still there that mowed down our young men. And then we went to the American cemetery. The landscape is pristine. We stood at the monument where there are the names of 1,900 soldiers whose bodies were never recovered. And looking out over that vast cemetery, 10,000 white marble crosses, 10,000 18 and 19-year-old kids who never had a chance in life. They never knew what it was to love a woman, to father a child. They were slaughtered like animals when they came ashore to liberate the world from a madman. But the company that we had arranged the trip with, unbeknownst to us, also had someone there that after we stood a few minutes in the silence, she began to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. And then they played taps. And I looked around, and there were tears coming down the face of grown men. That's myth. It's something that tells me something is right, that something is worth living for. If you were here for Christmas Mass, you know that after communion, the church is plunged into darkness, and there's only a light on the statue of Mary. And then out of the darkness, from up in the balcony, the choir begins to sing Silent Night, Holy Night. And you get goosebumps. That's myth. And we need to reinstitute that. Our children are growing up with a lack of myth. And myth lifts me, grabs hold of me. It gives me meaning and purpose. Secondly, We need to have a consensus among ourselves, a consensus about who we are as a people, where we're going, what gives us purpose, what gives us meaning. There's a total lack of consensus today. America is incredibly polarized, and what people are doing increasingly is going to the trenches and coming up out with inflammatory rhetoric and shouting at one another. We're never going to solve the problem. We're never going to go forward. We need to come to some common understandings, again, of what is right and what is wrong. The Supreme Court once defined pornography by saying that a community would know when the standard has been broken. That's no longer true. There's no consensus about anything. And when we look for consensus today among the divided issues, where do we go? We go to the courts. You can't legislate morality. In the 1960s, the court ordered forced busing. We integrated our schools. We were going to wipe out racism in America. Racism is as bad today as it was in the 1960s. You can't legislate morality. Consensus instead has to come from a conversion of my heart. I have to begin to change, each and every single one of us, so that we become part of a consensus about who we are, that we enter into a myth which supports our beliefs and enforces us. And you say, well, what difference do I make? I'm one little person. That's what got us where we are. If every one of us would light but one little candle in the darkness, suddenly there could dawn a new day for our country, for our church, for our children. Amen.